Hello everyone and welcome back to this series on Mark's Gospel. Last time we saw how John the Baptist was leading the way and preparing the way for God to come and bring his good news. And here we see that being fulfilled through Jesus the Messiah, the Son of God. And this is what it says within the account as we carry on reading from verse 9. It says, "In those days Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And when he came out of the water, immediately he saw the heavens being torn open and the Spirit descending on him like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, 'You are my beloved Son. With you I am well pleased.'" Another sign that was shown in the wilderness as well was when Moses passed on, when he died, someone took the helm of leading the nation of Israel and led them to the promised land. And that person's name was Joshua. And we read all about that in Joshua. And within the 3rd chapter itself, Joshua tells the nation of Israel to cross the Jordan River, very much the same as Moses did. This was done to not only remind Israel of their past achievements as they were being free from the exile, from the slavery of Egypt, but also to show that Joshua is not only the new leader, but he is the new Moses as well. Fast forward thousands of years later, and we see Jesus, we see Yeshua, which has the same, Joshua, Yeshua, Jesus, Jesus, etc. We see Jesus going into the Jordan River to get baptized by John, to show to all of Judea and to all of Jerusalem that a new Exodus is going to start. I'm not sure if you heard me when I read out the immediately, and I'm just going to warn you now, if you read in Mark's Gospel, you're going to have to get used to that term, because again, much like with the hyperbole that we talked about in the last video, he uses these type of words, these exciting words to, attract people to listen in on what happened. Because, Jesus got baptized and immediately the heavens tore open. You're like, oh, wow, okay, I better listen to this. I better start paying some attention. What Mark is doing is showing the urgency of his message by using these big, impactful words to show not only the ancient audience that this was addressed to, but to us today, how impactful, how incredible, how massive our God really is. And then comes the first of 2 times when we as readers will hear a booming voice coming from heaven, acknowledging that Jesus is his only Son. This, as well as the heading, is 2 of 3 times certain characters and certain people are going to acknowledge Jesus as being God's divine Son. The other type of character we will get to when we cross that bridge. And moving on, we go on to verse 12, where it says, "The Spirit immediately drove him out into the wilderness, and he was in the wilderness 40 days, being tempted by Satan. And he was with the wild animals, and the angels were ministering to him." After this monumental moment of the Father recognizing that Jesus is his only Son, the Spirit takes Jesus into the wilderness. Now, within the actual Greek text itself, the word that is used for drive out or, taken out is this Greek word which is ekbalo. Ekbalo. And what that means is he was thrown out. So the Spirit threw Jesus out. So what we can tell from this is that, Jesus, didn't really want to go out, but he was forced to. He was like, okay, what? Okay. Like I said in the last video, you can't think of wilderness without thinking of Israel being tested within the desert for 40 years. Time after time, God gave Israel test after test after test, and each and every time they failed. Moses even failed when he was being tested by God. So here is Jesus then, showing that a new Exodus is going to begin, and before he can do that, he is going through the same testing as Moses did. And being tested, he is being tested by Satan. Now, there are many meanings to what this name actually means. There is the accuser, the enemy, the opponent, or the adversary, all of which are not very nice terms. Within this account of Mark's Gospel, he is not known as the devil, but that's a name which is attributed to him within Luke and Matthew's account of Jesus being tested. Very quickly, I'm going to bring up this point right now, so we're all on the same page. It's really good, a part of our devotions, part of our spiritual journey, to read the Gospels as one type of narrative, because it's all historical, and we can point to this and be like, yes, this is all what it's all about. But also, it's important, whilst we're studying, to view each gospel separately, so that way we can see what the reader, what the writer wants to say to his audience. For instance, within this story of Jesus being tempted by Satan, we can very easily read in the tests themselves within Luke and Matthew's Gospels. But for the purposes of this study and for purposes of this type of series, I'm not going to be addressing those because they're not in Mark, if that makes sense. Going back to the text itself now, and there is a brief mention of animals and angels being present. For the time being, I just want to pay close attention to the animals in this case, because the contrast between Jesus and Satan and the angels ministering to Jesus, I then conclude that the animals are in some way in allegiance to Satan. Now, why on earth would I suggest this? Why would I imply that these wild animals are in line with Satan? Why would an animal want to test the Son of God? The answer to that is because within the Bible, animals have tested sons of God before. We read in Genesis 3, an animal tempting Adam and Eve to take the fruit and to be like gods, knowing the difference between good and evil. And this is what God then says to the snake. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So then, throughout the entire Bible, throughout the Old Testament, we are looking for this son of Adam and Eve, or in this case, son of man, who's going to, succeed and fulfill this role. However, much like Adam and Eve, they gave in to these animal tendencies, which we call as sin. We see Cain fail, we see Abraham fail, Jacob, Isaac, Joseph, Moses, King David, the whole nation of Israel failed, which ultimately led them to exile in Babylon. And whilst they were in Babylon, there was a prophet there whose name was Daniel, and Daniel had this vision of 4 beasts rising up from the sea. You can read more about this in Daniel 7, but the 4 beasts are meant to represent human empires which were reigning at the time. So we got the Babylonians, we've got the Persians, we've got the Greeks, and the last beast, which is too horrific for words to describe, we can see it being fulfilled as the Roman Empire. But then we see a son of man riding on the clouds towards God, and God gives this man all authority and all power amongst all the people of all nations across the world, and every single person worships and admires this figure. So going back to Jesus within the wilderness, we see him being able to withstand the temptations that Satan gives him. We see him overcoming the animal tendency that the Bible calls as sin. And not only that, he fulfills the role of this prophecy, both in Daniel and within Genesis itself. And we see this ultimately fulfilled when we come to the end of Mark's Gospel. And then finally, we come to this final section right here. Now, after John was arrested, Jesus came into Galilee, proclaiming the gospel of God, saying, the time is fulfilled and the kingdom of God is at hand. Repent and believe in the gospel. Hold on. John's gone to prison? Is that it? So wait, hold on. John's just been arrested and we're just going to ignore that? Well, for the time being, yes. We're going to come back to John in Mark chapter 6. But for the time being, it's important to understand that John's purpose was to lead the way for the Lord to come and bring his good news. And now that Jesus is finally on the scene, John is not the essential character. He's not the main character. The main character for this story is Jesus himself. One more final thing before I finish for today. Within the 21st century, where we are used to English literature and the certain mechanisms and tools that we use to help us to understand what's happening within the story. Things like similes, metaphors, personification, onomatopoeias, etc., etc. Within the ancient world, they didn't have that, so instead, they used other tools. One certain style of writing which was popular within the ancient world is a style which is called an inclusio. An inclusio is the same phrase being repeated at the start and at the end with a slight variation to let us know that there's a link and that part is now complete. A perfect example of this is within Matthew's Gospel, and it says that when the angel came, he told Joseph to name his child Jesus, as is fulfilled the prophecy that he'll be called Emmanuel, and that's seen fulfilled in Matthew chapter 28. This is exactly what is happening right here, because Mark is fulfilling this role, fulfilling that this good news is going to come through God, his divine Son, Jesus Christ. Within the very first verse, within the title of this gospel, it is the good news of Jesus the Messiah, the Son of God. And at the very end, it's Jesus proclaiming the good news of God. Now, what on earth could that link be? The link is that the good news of God has come by God becoming a human being in the bodily form of Jesus. Some people would think that because Mark was written first, that it's the least developed in comparison to John's gospel, where it's very much stated clearly where John depicts Jesus. However, we see that Mark doesn't make it so clear, rather he makes it clear through the words and actions of Jesus that we can see clearly who he is, which is the divine Son of God who has come to this troubling world and has come to share his good news, which is not for an elite group, but rather for the blind, the deaf, the lame, and the hopeless. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the beginning of the good news. Next time we're going to get more and more into Jesus' ministry and how he brings people along for the ride. But let me know what you think so far. Please comment down below on any questions that you have, and thank you guys so much for watching. Stay safe, God bless you all, and I'll see you next time.